Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel, Holistic Storytelling. I'm Alex,
I'm Tom.
smooth, and we're from Polygon Treehouse, which is a small indie studio based in Cambridge in the UK. And we're making our debut title. It's a game called Röki. It's a modern exploration adventure game inspired by Scandinavian folklore. Um, But before we get started, we thought we'd talk a little bit about who we are and where we've come from,
Should we do the speedy version so we don't just talk about that for an hour?
please.
So we're both from an art background. We actually went to uni together. This will be the quick version. Went to uni together, and then we both got jobs for Sony and PlayStation, and worked there for nearly 15 years. Both ended up being art directors, working in Cambridge, but across the kind of all the franchises on Sony. Worked on some really cool stuff like Killzone and Heavenly Sword and various things. Ended up doing VR game called Rigs, our last game. And then, unfortunately, as is often the way in the industry, the studio closed down. But we saw that as an opportunity to create something new. So we started Polygon Treehouse, our own studio, and decided for our first game, decided quite quickly, surprisingly, that we wanted to do a narrative adventure game and focus on storytelling, which hopefully puts us in a good position to be here now and talk to you.
Yeah, so I guess the our original inspiration was we really enjoyed playing games like Tentacle Monkey Island when we were growing up, and we wanted to see how we could take that genre and our own spin in it and update it for players today. So that's what we've been attempting to do with Röki. So far, so good. Um, so guessing just to kick things off, the panel's holistic storytelling. So we thought we'd better explain what that means, just in case it's a bit confusing. So I guess what we're talking about is our approach to storytelling in games. We're obviously from an art background. That's where our core skill set lies. But in our approach to storytelling, basically, we try to leverage all the possible tools at our disposal to help tell the story in the game. So you've got the script, you've got things like cinematography, lighting, you've got uh, audio, which is very important, and you've got, well, probably last but by no means least, like the gameplay and mechanics can also be a great venue for storytelling in games. So part of our ethos and how we think about things, we try and make sure that we have all the levers to pull to try and make sure that we can tell the best story and with the best emotional impact that we can. So high level, that's what we mean when we talk about holistic storytelling. And I guess a caveat before we kick off properly, this is very much how we approach things. It's kind of how we feel about making games and narrative in games. It's by no means the definitive, like you must, this is the correct way of doing things. It's kind of how we go about things and about how we like to work. So yeah, other approaches are available.
I want to get this also, like as we mentioned, because our backgrounds from art, so we have I think we have a visual take on things, which maybe skews how we look at stuff. But it's also governed by our own interests and what we like. And I think as we talked about doing an indie game and doing a narrative game, we felt that that was a really good space to tell a story because you can do something that's a bit more smaller and you can kind of put your own love into it and do your own take on it, and there's not necessarily these big expectations of AAA games that need to be huge big behemoths of titles that actually we could never do as a small studio. uh, so that was really exciting for us, that we could take some of our skills and actually learn some new skills and kind of put them all together and tell a story that was something we were really kind of keen to tell. um, and that, if you play the game, you'll get to experience as well. So yeah, I guess why don't we dive into some kind of more specifics, Al, if you're ready.
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
uh,
totally.
so I think a good place to start, and as Al touched on, I think one of the really powerful things about computer games and telling stories is that it's not a really limited defined medium. There's actually got a lot of tools you can use. The first one obviously being the gameplay itself. It's a game, there's direct player input. So let's just talk a little bit about that. We're obviously kind of spitballing as we go, so let's see.
Yeah,
But
I think it's a really interesting one because in some ways it can be a little bit overlooked because I think partly this kind of gameplay itself mechanically as a kind of as a storytelling device, I think is a really powerful thing. A lot of the games we made when I was first at Sony were quite cutscene heavy. They were kind of action adventure games, and they were quite cutscene heavy, and a lot of time and energy and effort was put into crafting these cutscenes to help tell the story. So you had gameplay, cutscene, and a lot of energy and time was spent crafting these things, and people just skip them and then not have any idea what's going on in the story because they want to be playing the game. So I think having your kind of the intrinsic gameplay of your game being a venue for telling the story as you're going, I think is a really powerful thing. And I'm guessing, I think games are interactive. Having people sit down and watch a movie or a cutscene feels a bit didactic. It doesn't really feel that fun. So yeah, I think there's some really interesting ways of helping to tell stories with your actual the gameplay.
I
Um,
mean, so I think the danger is you immediately take away one of the things that is really powerful from games, which is like active user input. And you mean it can be done really well if you can kind of seamlessly go to cutscenes and it feels like a continuation of the story. I mean, something like The Last of Us does that exceptionally well, where it doesn't feel jarring to go into cutscenes. But I think that one of the reasons for that is that you're so connected to the characters, and they've done such a good job in making you invested in the story that actually those two things can run together. Um, so for us, I think it was a very conscious decision from the start, wasn't it, Al, that we didn't want to have lots of cutscenes, partly because actually it's quite time consuming as well, but we also wanted to make sure players were involved in the story, involved in learning about the past of the players and actively being engaged in their progression and discovering what was going to happen to them.
yeah, so let's just to rewind a little bit about, let's say, talk a bit about Röki and its overall plot. So you play a young girl called Tuve, and you're going into the ancient Scandinavian wilderness to try and find your brother Lars, who's been taken by Röki, who's a great big monster with glowing eyes. In fact, prop, he's there. Actually, you might be able to see that.
Not a cushion in the game
He's,
though.
no, he's not actually a cushion in the game. But and so it's about you and Tuve comes from a family that's a little bit broken. So part of the story, as well as this fantastical journey into folklore in the Scandinavian wilderness, is also this story about trying to reforge Tuve's family. And so, in talking about gameplay as a storytelling device, one of the things we do quite a lot in the game is about forging bonds between the characters via the things you're doing in the game, rather than telling someone to care about someone in a cutscene or in dialogue. The actions you're doing and the setup for the game is about nurturing and building a bond between the players. And in some ways, later on in the game, which we can't really talk about because it's a spoiler, but there's some things we do to help heal bonds between characters, involve the intrinsic gameplay of what you're doing, which we feel is a really powerful thing. I guess examples in games that exist already that do interesting things. That is the Brothers Tales of Two Sons. I'm sure quite a few people have played that. Whereas and that game is a really interesting example of storytelling games because, from what I remember, it has no dialogue, and you're controlling one brother on one stick and the other brother on the other stick, and as you play the game, the bond that forms between the two characters, which you have no prior reason to be well, super engaged with. It really grabs you. I think that kind of stuff, and Ico as well is one of my favorite games, and the bond you feel between the little horned child and the princess is really powerful. So I think there's something there about when you're telling the story intrinsically with the gameplay, it can be a really powerful thing. And so we try and do stuff like
I
that.
think you can never underestimate how quickly people will project onto characters they can relate to. So if you have stories to do with relationship, like everyone ever has a relationship of some kind. Like everyone has a mother, or maybe a brother or a sister or a child or someone in their life, right? So you have, or a best friend or whatever it is that you have a relationship with. So if you can kind of pluck on those, I guess, the devices that exist in those relationships, you can get the player to emote. There's a game that was a while ago now called The Passage by a guy called Jason Rowe, and it's really small game. It's like if you download it now, it would take up a fraction of your screen because it's like all pixels, and you basically play as a guy going through life, and all that looks like is you just walking to the right, and you can go through gaps in walls. It's gone a bit like a maze. Um, and at some point, you can either meet someone or not. And if you choose to meet someone, it means you can't get through the smaller gaps because you're holding hands, you're wider. So you have to go through bigger gaps. So it's, kind of a metaphor for choosing different paths in life. Spoiler alert, later on, the kind of pixel wife that you found suddenly just turns into a grave. And it's like you've played for 2 minutes, but it was really like profoundly moving, and it's suddenly like, oh, now I'm alone again, and that kind of gives me different freedom. But I kind of enjoyed that being restricted in a way, and us having to do this adventure together. And it was just little pixel characters, no text or speech or anything, so it was all kind of internalized and projected onto these characters, but it was amazingly powerful because of that. And I think that's kind of a lesson that actually less is more sometimes, as long as you don't create characters that provoke the wrong response. So like they're either really annoying or they have a trait that you just don't like. You can make things, if you give them some humanity, people with connect to them. Not to ramble on the point too much, but like The Sopranos is another really good example. When you look at Tony Soprano, who by all accounts is like a detestable human being, but in the first episode they show him, like, give him empathy towards these ducks, and it's like, okay, well, he can't be that bad, he likes these ducks. And then he has this kind of moral code, however skewed it is. You go, well, he kind of got some values, they just exist in this world where he kills a lot of people. But it allows you to kind of go, well, there's a humanity there, as opposed to him just being this bad guy. It's like, again, really simple stuff, and without that the series just wouldn't work. And it's so clever and powerful.
I'm guessing an interesting thing there about kind of depth of character with Röki is an interesting thing to touch on is kind of misunderstood monsters and having shades of grey in characters. So one of the things, obviously, the game has lots of monsters in it. That's not a spoiler. We're telling everyone. And one of the things, we've made quite a lot of games where you shoot things, or your people meet sticky ends. And so we obviously, Rookie is a non-violent game. It's more about using your head and your heart. And so when you meet monsters in the game, rather than attacking them, actually you're trying to help them like solve their problems. And if you can help them, they can help you and unlock paths deeper into the forest. And we really like the idea of not having these characters that are like pure good or pure evil. It's just very boring and it feels very fake. So all the characters, we've really, even like the kind of the big bad in the game, we've tried to make sure that they have some dimensions to them, even from like the start, so that it's just more believable. Even if you can have like fantastical settings and strange creatures, you still need some tangibility to their characters, make them feel real and not just cardboard cutouts. So that depth of character and playing with what is a monster is something that we've been really interested in exploring in the game.
Yeah, I mean, so you kind of talk about the monsters, obviously the folklore inspirations we had, and particularly Scandinavian folklore. I think a lot of the stuff I particularly liked, and we both liked in that, was that some of them often challenged the assumption of what a child was, and particularly what a child was capable of. Like there was one really good story that's about a young kid. I think his family's cow gets stolen. There's a lot of cow stealing that goes on in folklore stories. Uh, but I think a troll had taken it. They couldn't get it back, and so the kid sets off to get it back by himself or herself. I can't remember. Goes into the forest, and then they meet all these different monsters. But because they're kind of innocent as a child, they don't see them as monsters. And like, so one of them's I think a scary wolf or something that tries to eat it, or a bear, but it's got toothache, and the child's like, "Oh, you've got something in your tooth," and pulls it out. It's a bit like the mouse and the lion. And so the bear's like, "Oh, okay, you helped him. I'm not going to eat you now. It's kind of nice." And like it goes on, so on and so forth. And then at the end, the kid gets into trouble with the troll, but all these monsters that originally were going to kind of eat the kid or harm the kid change their mind about it and come and help the kid get the cow back. And it's just like it's really nicely done, and it subverts the expectations of everyone in it, except maybe the troll. And it was like, there's something really powerful in that. I think it was part of the reason we were interested in having children, and like in particular Tuve, the young girl who you play as the main character in the game. But yeah, having children as the main characters, because seeing the world through their eyes, particularly because it's a world that's slightly magical, something inherently kind of more exciting about that, I think, without the kind of, jaded eyes of adults, so to speak. So again, I think that was an angle we thought was really interesting in terms of access to this story.
Yeah, so it's two ways because she doesn't. Yeah, she's a kid, so she's got eyes unclouded. So I think having her be able to see creatures that look quite scary and grotesque, and at some points, and be able to look beyond it, which thought in today's world was actually a really nice, a nice, a nice message to be sending to people as making the game. So yeah,
I mean, sorry, it just reminded me actually, sorry to start talking about, like, I think one of the early on the interesting choices we had, because it's a game about monsters, but there's also this kind of emotional story of the family. We're like, well, this could become quite heavy pretty quickly if we're not careful. So we wanted to make sure that the kind of minute by minute experience with Tuve was relatively kind of upbeat's maybe too strong a word, but wasn't stressful for the player. So it's kind of, and we can touch on this later with the environment and cinematography and stuff like that. But
music,
that,
yeah.
that and the music, that side of it was kind of more relaxing, explorative, but that was also reflected in her character. Because actually, the sections, and this goes back to what we're talking about in terms of using gameplay as a storytelling device, the sections where we do tell you about her past and what's happened, like there's essentially this dark thing that's happened that she alludes to, that's kind of made her how she is a bit, made her relationship with her brother what it is, made her relationship with her father what it is, and you don't know what's happened. And you can kind of tell pretty early it's not good. But instead of, like Alan talked about, just having a cutscene to show that, we have very distinct moments in the game where you go back and experience certain memories that help to explain to the player what's happened, but you experience them in gameplay. So they're kind of almost slightly dreamlike sequences that fit into the structure of the game mechanics as like a puzzle adventure game, but they're done in a way that actually allows you to uncover what's happened, and the exposition of those moments, so you can start to piece together the backstory and use that to kind of, okay, right, now I know what's going on, and it becomes a more fully formed Tuve becomes a more fully formed character as you progress because of that.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads on quite nicely talking about um, archaeological storytelling and the journal and stuff like that, and also like gaps in the gameplay, which I think are really important. So when we were talking about archaeological like storytelling, it's kind of like being put in a situation, as Tom was saying, you don't you're placed in the game, you don't have the full story to your hand. We don't have big exposition heaving cutscenes at the start. So we wanted to kind of get the player in and get them playing, and it's about digging away and uncovering little story nuggets as you're going, and with exploration as well. So there's a scene in the demo that you'll be able to play over LudoNarraCon, where in the graveyard there's you can examine all the tombstones and the relics, and throughout the game you're by exploration, the player is an active agent in uncovering bits of the story and expanding their understanding of what is going on. And we really like that approach of archaeological storytelling, and by exploration, the player being in charge of that. I think it's really, really powerful. Doesn't spoon feed anyone, and the players engaged. They're the person telling the story to themselves. And gaps in the gameplay are also really important. The game's set in the Scandinavian wilderness, and early on, from our first initial tests, it's nice just to run around, to run around and make tracks in the snow, and because we're dealing with some quite reasonably heavy themes at some point, actually having some time for contemplation. So you can have spoken to someone and done something, and as you're as Tuve, and then you can as you're running to the next place you're trying to get to, you've got time. You can hear the sound of nature and the trees moving in the wind, and having those gaps for the player to think about, what's been happening and how they feel about it. Having those gaps, so it's not just a big narrative wall. We think are really important. Uh,
I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that reminded me that, like, as a learning experience for us, we kind of used to have, when we started out, not cutscenes per se, but you go in somewhere and it would trigger something. Like, it might just be Tuve would walk into an area and comment on something. We're like, that's cool. She's going to a new place. It's not like a cutscene. It's a couple of lines. But actually, as we kept on doing it, it didn't work as well. And like, we found that people tuned out a bit because it was passive. Like, they weren't really triggering it themselves by really doing anything. They were just going into a place, and then Tuve was saying something, as opposed to, you put something in the world that they can go up to and click on and make Tuve actively look at it, and then she comments. It's like, I made her do that, so I'm engaged with that. It's now a choice I've made, so therefore I'm interested in what it has to say. And it's like a really subtle difference in a way. Like, the can be saying exactly the same thing, but the act of actively triggering it makes it more interesting and more powerful. So that's kind of something we've tried to do in this world, as Al talks about, that you explore. So there's lots of stuff. It's not always picking up stuff and solving puzzles. There's things to interact with and find out bits and pieces about the story in kind of a secondary way that actually add more information there.
Yes, we do some. We also have some. We have some collectible items in the game that aren't like super central to the story, and I think how we got a kind of a layered approach there. In that when you're playing the game, you have the conversations that you'll be having with these creatures and the things you'll be uncovering as you examine this ancient wilderness as you're going deeper and deeper into it. But one of the things we want to give the player the option that if they want to dig more into some of the story they can. So Tuve keeps a journal, and as you uncover new locations or new key events happen, she'll write down notes in the journal, and that's got, well, I guess from a design point of view, it's got a few different functions. So for one, it allows us to give the player a reminder of stuff they've done and assistance if they've got stuck. But from a storytelling point of view, really powerful because it gives the player a different view at Tuve, and Tuve's right. When Tuve's speaking the dialogue in the game, dialogue in the game, she's vocalizing things externally, whereas the dialogue, the stuff in the journal, her notes, that's kind of her internal thoughts. So actually, she can be slightly more candid, or maybe she is more open about her fears when it's a different voice, basically. Tuve in the journal versus her outward dialogue in the game, and having that layer, so you can see the things she's saying outwardly, and then the things she feels inwardly. We thought that was a really powerful thing to do, because there may be differences between what she's saying and maybe sometimes what she's feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting because probably saw I was slightly distracted 2 minutes ago because I was looking at the chat and I can't multitask. It's really in my face. There's a question from Goldie from Wayward Strand saying, does Tuve struggle or engage with the idea of characters, even monsters, being complex, or is she intuitively receptive to them, to that? Which I thought was a really good question based on what we were talking about a few seconds ago, but actually ties in quite nicely with the journal. So, like, the short answer is she's pretty on board with some of the weird stuff that happens quite quickly. And that was a deliberate thing because we wanted to accelerate the pace and we didn't, and we wouldn't want to have a kind of long drawn out thing of her being really scared or kind of learning to overcome that. Instead, there's kind of a couple of things we do. We ramp up the kind of meeting she has and the monsters she has to deal with, so that journey does escalate, but it starts at a level of kind of acceptance. But then, as Alex talks about, the journal actually provides a really strong counterpoint for that. So it's like outwardly she can be kind of slightly more positive or brazen and optimistic, but then the journal is her kind of inner struggle, and where you kind of see her self-doubts and you see that she is really worried about her brother, and actually also reading it makes it kind of more personal as well, I think. And then it's like her diary, so it is her kind of dearest thoughts, and the act of reading as well makes it kind of a personal connection. So, like, to cleverly tie into holistic storytelling, that's a different device, right? The way you transfer the message, whether it's like the spoken word or the written word. I mean, ours, we don't actually have a lot of VO, but we can talk about that a bit later. But even just the difference between it being a journal or being like a spoken dialogue on the screen is actually quite big as well. So all these things, I think, trying to use them in different ways, you can kind of push the different levels.
Cool. But yeah, actually, it's a very good point. So I also cannot multitask, so I won't be looking at the chat. But what we are going to
Old
be doing,
men do games.
we were going to say at the end, straight after this panel, after like a 10-minute break, we'll be doing a live Q&A over on the Röki page. So any questions from this chat, we will pick up. If we don't get them in this one, we'll pick up and roll into the next session on the Röki page. So yeah. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is cinematography. So as we were saying earlier about cutscenes in games, obviously cinematography in games shouldn't be limited. It's not just for cutscenes. And this is something that I'm particularly really interested in. I think we've done a lot of stuff in Röki that I'm really pleased with. I think there's ways that it can be pushed further. But yeah, so cinematography and as a storytelling device, and obviously it's used a lot in films to try and, I guess, adjust how you're feeling about the events. It's a modifier. Yeah, it's giving you extra information about how you should be feeling based on how we perceive the world from being an animal. So if if the camera's looking up at something, you'll find them quite intimidating. Just how we're programmed. So cinematography is used in gameplay in some games, like for example in racing games. If you hit like speed boost, sometimes it'll crush the focal length and you'll get a sensation of speed. Same with in some like first person shooters, when you hit sprint, things will happen with the focal length. It'll make you feel like you're going fast. Obviously that's to give you a sense of speed. And kind of is a storytelling, right? It's telling the story of the game that you're going faster. So it's interesting to look at how how cinematography can be used in gameplay and in Röki we've done a few things. So the first thing that we did was we took control of the camera. Right. So we did some tests. We had like 3 cameras, but actually it's a double win because if we take control of the camera, not only do we have it in our bag of tricks as a storytelling tool we can leverage to help reinforce and tell the story, it also means that we can really stage our environments how we want them. So it creates less work for Tom. So when he's creating the environment space, he can just build them to the cameras that we choose.
There is just a button. There is a slight. I can't remember really what came first, but like to add to that, whilst we can choose the angles, like one of the conscious decisions we made was to not just make the game all 2D flats. because actually that was too restrictive. So like you see the game because of the way it's shaded, like it's very graphical and flat shaded and colorful. Like a lot of people think it's just 2D, and it's not at all. Like all of the environments are 3D. And I mean, yes, a lot of the objects won't have backs to them, um, because they are orchestrated for particular cameras. But there's enough 3D world there that we can kind of have a camera up here, or we can have one like tracking her, and so that's my little interjection about that. But I think it's interesting because we chose to do the worlds in a way that allowed us to get a kind of strong, I guess, to give us a range of cameras for that we could use for our cinematography, so that we weren't really constrained to always being kind of flat on and doing like it's really far out or it's a bit closer still. Like we wanted to actually have a real range. So there you
I
go.
think it's a really good point, and the fact that the game is all 3D means that we can be quite dynamic with the camera, so we can go really close up. I mean, we share a lot of like videos of character animations over on our Twitter account, and because everything is polygons, you can get up, and because it's got quite a graphical angular style, things still hold up really well if you kind of ram the camera right up to Tuve's face. She still, so we can be really like brave and quite extreme with some of our camera choices. But I'm guessing one of the key things that we do from a cinematography point of view is our kind of bread and butter cameras. Well, I call them, or no one else calls them. I call them like predator cameras. So we have cameras that basically are stuck like behind a bush or in the undergrowth. So we have some foreground objects which help give our scenes lots of depth. And then we'll stick a camera there somewhere, and the camera will basically watch Tuve as she's running around the world. And it's quite a subtle thing because you probably don't want like cinematography that's going to really bang you over the head, because that's not particularly subtle and will quickly reveal itself uh, as a device. So having these little cameras that just like something is watching her from the shadows as a general thing that happens throughout the game feels really powerful. It feels that she's this young child, small girl in this huge forest, and having the way that you're viewing the game is like these things watching her from the undergrowth. I think I really like it. I think it's really good. And just a really, it's a subtle thing, but it's just a layer of uncertainty and threat at all times when you're playing the game.
It also can highlight that she's very alone as well. You make her smaller on screen, she suddenly looks very little, and you're like, oh, this is just kind of a kid in a big place. Um, and it's like a really simple thing to do and creates very powerful results. Well, I think that's the key, certainly for us, suddenly coming from you know big game budgets with lots of people to small indie game budgets with not so many people, admittedly a small and very talented team, but a small team nonetheless, is that actually you need to be clever in what you do. Not to say we haven't made lots of mistakes as well, but there are some things I think we've done well and made smart decisions on that allow us to kind of really push stuff, and get the most out of what we do. Um, so that the art style leading into allowing us to do all these kind of camera work, camera moves and things, which in turn really help, uh, really work in terms of backing up the story and the emotions that the player is feeling. I think is really strong.
Yeah, I'm guessing like from the camera point of view, like we could have not done that. We could have just had, we could have just had, either free cam or just more staged cameras. But I guess it would have felt like a missed opportunity to not leverage the camera to give some emotion or some story undercurrent in the game. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's
and
something you're I was going to say it's something you're very hot on, right? Which is why you've named it yourself as a predator cam. But but it's not just the predator cam. Like I think Alex is always very keen on there being movement between cameras. So even if it is cuts to a character talking to another character and it's a different camera position, you can still then subtly zoom in or zoom out or kind of rotate the camera, and it doesn't have to be much, but it makes a massive difference. And like if you watch film and TV, a lot of the time the camera is always moving. You don't really notice it consciously, but you certainly notice when it's not there and it's just not as good. Like movement is good in games, and generally, like whether it's really subtle kind of secondary movement on stuff in the foreground or like it's the camera slowly moving. And again, like back to the what is easy to do, moving the camera or kind of fading between two different camera positions is very easy for us to do. So it's like a really strong device.
Yeah, it does tell you a lot about a conversation or a character. Like, so what, as Tom was saying, we try and do really subtle, moves in and moves out of cameras on most things in the game, just to give that element of dynamism. On some of the more sinister scenes or troubled scenes, we play with camera spin a lot, which is, it's that's basically the thing that, if you're seeing a film, the more extreme the spin gets, it's something's up. So we try and, on some of the more spooky scenes, we try and leverage that quite a lot, and it's all subtle. So you probably, when you're watching it, you probably wouldn't even know that it's happening. But that's the good stuff. If you can't see that you're being someone's playing camera tricks with you, that's when it's worked. So, yeah.
I was saying, like, so going back to what you're saying, what I like is that we can kind of ensure that the player never misses anything we want them to see, because we're always dictating what they're looking at to a certain extent, which is really important. Like we've got on our notes as a reference of like games that do it really well are Resident Evil games, because it's always like a set camera, particularly the original ones. And like, I remember being at school playing Resident Evil. One of my friends coming in one day and was like, bust my PlayStation controller. And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah, I was playing Resident Evil, and that bit where the dogs jump through the window, like, it scared him so much that he threw his controller across the room. It's like, it's because it's done so well done in terms of everything. It's not just the camera, but it's like kind of like holistic storytelling in that one corridor. But the camera played a massive part in setting up the suspense and ensuring it kind of delivered with the maximum punch. That he was like, I always remember it. It's like, oh, it's a long time ago now. But
Yeah, it's
yeah,
great. It was not just what you can see as well; it's what you can't see, and having that kind of uncomfortable, some of those uncomfortable camera bits in games like that, where you kind of can't see what I'm getting to. Yeah, it's really powerful. But yeah, we should talk about audio, which is another really big storytelling thing. So I think from our Sony days, we'd done a lot of trailer work, and the first thing we always tried to do was establish audio, 'cause it has a huge part. So we already knew that it was going to be a big part of the game, and we'd started, pretty early on playing around with audio and how it would make the player feel, especially in some of the more open areas. Um, and again, like if we weren't leveraging audio and music and non-linear music, so dynamic music, interactive music, then it would have felt like a really missed opportunity from an animator. Because I do a lot of the characters and the animation stuff, and we've done a lot in the game with selling emotion with the characters. But it makes my life so much easier if we have like awesome emotive audio and music and soundtrack to the game. And that's the kind of thing about holistic storytelling, is not only do we need the characters has the really emotional animation, and we have some VO stuff. But, if we don't have, if we're not firing on all cylinders, and not going to get the whole impact. So yeah, the music, the audio was like critical for us from the off. So we've had a lot of time and finding the right people to work with. Ali, our sound designer, and Aether, Jason, who's our composer, have brought a huge. That what they brought to the table is a huge part of the game, and the game, I think, sounds as as atmospheric as it looks, and that makes our job in telling stories much easier.
yeah. I mean, we talked a bit earlier, didn't we, about a lot of the time you're exploring and running around, and I think it's in kind of intrinsic gameplay that you need to search for stuff, and that can be very satisfying when you find things. But equally, there can be, and we have like some fast travel systems as well to shortcut it at times. 'Cause essentially, what we want to make sure is that players don't get frustrated running around the world, or particularly going back to the same place. Um, So along with the fast travel, one of the things we were very mindful of was making sure that the music sat behind what you were doing, and made you feel kind of comfortable in this world, that it could be this kind of slightly melodic, calming influence on you. So that particularly also then when it does get more suspenseful or we ratchet it up, like that's the signifier that something bad is happening, or like start to take real interest in what's going on. But it does really act, I think, as a kind of soothing device for when you're running around the world in your kind of explorative way. If it was kind of really intense all the time, or it was kind of this big orchestral music, I think it would be too much, and it would set the expectations too high. And so it was a very deliberate choice on our part. Unfortunately, but we don't actually have many creative differences, which is good. Like, but that again, we were. It'd be a good time to reveal that we have loads, wouldn't it? But like that again, that was something we were quite aligned on very early. Was that we didn't want a big kind of orchestral soundtrack behind it. We wanted something quite modern, something kind of quite different in a way. So we wanted like a very kind of ambient electronic sounding backdrop to the game. And Jason has kind of taken the brief and actually surpassed my expectations for it. It's brilliant what he's done. It's like, the kind of, we talk about it a lot, listening to soundtrack of such and such a game, because it's so good that you can just listen to it its own right. And I, like, hand on heart, honestly believe the soundtrack Jason's created is one of those soundtracks that you can, just put on and work to, because it's so chill.
I think also I completely agree. I think the not about the
Thanks.
creative differences a bit, the loads, but but with the music, I think the non-linear interactive component of it is quite exciting as a storytelling thing. So we do lots of things in the third act of changing the music depending on different character themes, and that again reinforcing situations of certain characters by the music, but doing it in a dynamic way linked to the gameplay feels really really powerful.
I
And
mean, sorry to jump in on that's just reminded me, one of the coolest things about that is actually there's like specific instruments for specific characters. So the actual overall melody of the track can be the same, so you can kind of intercut between it really easily, but then specific instruments will fade in and out depending on who the character is. And it's like it's again quite simple but super powerful. So you start to kind of recognize, I don't have the musical terminology to do it justice, but you start to really recognize the different instruments as they're like cues, like, oh, this is that character. That's
so yeah,
something
you've got
really great
associations.
working. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And then it gets on the other side of the audio. We have an emote system in the game because the game has a lot of dialogue. I think we've got like over 38,000 words. So we don't have full VO, but we do. We've worked with Scandinavian actors to build these huge emote libraries for the characters. So when you see a line of dialogue, basically we can tag it with an emotion. And so we again did some tests early on with that, and we knew we didn't want to have full VO for the game because we were quite nervous about it. We don't really have that much experience in that kind of thing, to be honest. And it was going to be a big risk. And so and we found that sometimes people would just skip it. So we've got this emote library system, so we can get the human emotion and the performance from it, but it doesn't get in the way of the game. But yeah,
Can you do some impressions, Alex, in case people are unclear what you're talking about?
no, we'll do it in the QA one afterwards. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there. I realize we haven't really spoken much about the underlying story and dialogue itself. Obviously, that is very important to the game. But what we want to talk about with holistic storytelling is more that it's not just about the dialogue and the plot. There's all these other storytelling tools that we have, game makers, around it. Some are underused, which we can use to elevate and tell a story. So yeah, we've been Polygon Treehouse. We're going to, like I said before, we'll go to the Röki page and kick off a QA if you've got any questions in 10 minutes. The game Röki is going to be out this year. We're going to announce a release date soonish, and it's going to be launching on Switch and on Steam. And say thanks to fellow traveller and LudoNarraCon for having us. Anything to add, Tom?
No, we definitely out. Oh yeah, we are out of time. I was just checking.
Also,
No, thank you. I hope it's been interesting. Hopefully you can tell how passionate we are about the game. We're very excited for everyone who wants to get to play it and hopefully see some of these things that we've discussed in action. And yeah, it'll be out soon. We're nearly done. Hooray! On the final straight. So it's very exciting. You can all join our digital only launch party when it happens.
awesome. Thanks for watching.
Thanks very much. Have a great evening, day, night, wherever you are.